We engage with the church, we equip the church, and then we help them execute.
This is the Real Purpose Podcast, where we interview people and organizations operating with a real purpose and encourage listeners to consider where they need to start praying, giving, or going to live their real purpose. Hey everyone. We have a very exciting show for you today on the Real Purpose Podcast. I just got done talking with Amber Knowles, who is the founder and the executive director of the Riverside Project. She's a mother of four, two of them that she adopted through the foster care system. And she talks about, her journey of starting as a nurse practitioner and then deciding to foster some children and then eventually founding this amazing organization of the Riverside Project here in Houston. So I'm really excited for you guys to hear about, what she has to share. Please listen. There's a lot of sections that I would recommend re-listening to. There's so much awesome information that comes out of this. And one quick reminder, we do match the first $1,000 of donations that get given to the Riverside Project. So please do give. If you can't go to riversideproject.org/give, and in the comment box, put an RP or a real purpose. And like I said, that first $1,000 will be matched. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Real Purpose Podcast. This is your host, Matt. And today I have a really special guest, Amber Knowles. She's the founder and executive director of the Riverside Project. Welcome, Amber. Thanks
for having me.
Yeah, so really excited to hear your story and just hear more about your organization. I mean, it's just, I'm so incredibly amazed at how you took the jump, just from working as a nurse practitioner and then, starting this organization. I'm just so excited to hear more about kind of what took you there. But before we get into the details, why don't you, just give a little synopsis about who you are. Like I said, we'll get into how you got into this amazing organization, but just who you are, high level.
Sure. Well, as you said, I'm Amber Knowles. I am the executive director and founder of the Riverside Project. I am a mom of four. We have four kiddos. They are 9, 8, 6, and 5. Two of them came to us through foster care. So of course, there's a little sneak peek into how we got into the foster care world. But yeah, our life kind of evolved over time with our four kiddos and living in that space. My husband is a pastor here in the Houston area. And so I always say the way that everything came together was sort of those worlds colliding, working as a nurse practitioner, fostering, living in the church world, everything kind of collided and became the Riverside Project.
Awesome. So just for my information, did you start fostering children before the Riverside Project, or kind of what was the event structure there?
Yeah, my first interaction with foster care was working as a nurse practitioner. So I worked in pediatric community health here in Houston, and I had patients from time to time that were in foster care. And so it gave me a little bit of a window into what the needs are of kids in foster care, not just the kids, but the families too. They're trying to navigate this really complex world. They had extra paperwork that I had to fill out. Medications, and even from little toddlers and infants all the way up to teenagers, the needs were very complex and interacting. And of course, as you probably know, kind of this whole world and bureaucratic system that these kids and families find themselves in. So that was kind of my first interaction. And then when my husband and I decided to step into fostering ourselves, it became personal, right? It starts this whole world that was kind of out there that I saw at work was now in my home. And so we got kind of a front row seat to what that looked like and what the gaps were that we were seeing in the system.
So what was your experience? I mean, you mentioned the gaps. Was it a challenging time? Is that kind of what brought you to feeling like they were seeing the need?
Yeah, the needs of the kids. I mean, you step in and you only have, when you're stepping into fostering, we knew we wanted to adopt at some point. That was always something that we had talked about even before we got married. And then you start stepping into this world that you only hear about, like in the news, right? You only hear these horrible stories about the foster care system and how it's broken and how it's failing kids. And then you step into it and you see not just this kid that's in your home that has all these needs and all these, they have family members and they have this whole situation and story that was happening in their life and in their family's life before we ever even stepped into it. And so it just, your whole world kind of starts to shift slowly. You start to realize that I'm not stepping in to save this kid. There's this whole world of, he has a family that cares for him, that there are needs behind the needs, behind the needs, behind the needs. You know, it's so complex. And then you start trying to navigate this system where there's not a whole lot of support for foster families who are stepping in, even though they are taking in these children with these complex needs. We started seeing gaps in the type of training and support for dealing with and caring for and connecting with kids that have a background of trauma, from caseworkers to parents to therapists to educators, realizing that there's just not a lot of training out there to really know how to do this well. And then just this cohesive element of collaboration that we felt like was lacking. No one's talking to each other. And so it, just from my medical background and trying to see how these pieces fit together, it became, how do we recognize these gaps, but also assess where they're coming from, and then start moving forward towards like meaningful changes that we could put in place. And so it just kind of got my wheels spinning. But yeah, it really started with what was happening in our own home. In particular, there was we realized that most families didn't have babysitters. That was a very specific thing that we stepped into, not realizing that when you're in foster care or you have a kid in foster care in your home, you can't call your aunt or your uncle or your sister or your neighbor or your parents to come and babysit. You have to have them background checked and certified and all of that. And so that was a real quick gap that we realized was just, most families are not supported. They can't just go get date nights and get rest. And so that was really where we started.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that's a perfect transition into really the organization. Just, I mean, why don't you give me just, what is the Riverside Project? What is the purpose of it? This is the Real Purpose podcast. So what is the purpose of this organization that you founded?
Yeah, the main purpose is to become kind of this collaborative network of different agencies and churches and nonprofits who are all coming together to transform the foster care system in Houston. It really came from this idea that we kept hearing that the foster care system is broken, and to an extent, it's broken because there's brokenness in the world. And so, yes, any issue that we're trying to tackle is broken in that sense. But we believe it doesn't have to stay that way, that we can use the gifts and talents that we have, whether we're a part of an actual agency or we're just a normal person or a church in the community. We have a role to play in making it not as broken. And so it's, the vision of our organization is to really help people to find their place and then give them the tools and the resources that they need to step in and make an impact along this kind of metaphorical river that we see.
Yeah, awesome. And we'll get into that metaphor because I love the concept here. But I guess just I want to touch on, you mentioned that there's different organizations, churches, et cetera, that are finding what their role is. So could you maybe just give me, like, if I'm a church and I'm looking to get involved, what does that process look like, from start to finish?
Yeah, we have a team of church mobilization specialists who work with congregations to help them find a place to engage with not just kids in foster care, but vulnerable kids and families in their neighborhood. We know that foster care as a system is only one piece of the bigger picture. It's not disconnected from all the other social issues we see affecting our city. And so it broadens the ability of people to step in, when we know that foster care doesn't just happen in isolation. It happens because there are families in poverty that are struggling, and some of them are homeless, some of them have addiction issues, some of them have a crisis pregnancy. There are reasons upstream, if you will, from this issue that we see as foster care. And so that broadens what churches can do in the city. And it's really just looking for families and recognizing the vulnerabilities that are in our community and then having the tools to step in. So we have these church mobilization specialists, and we take churches through this process. And the process, of course, within the church world, your 3 points, you have alliteration. We engage with the church, we equip the church, and then we help them execute. And so that's kind of our process: is engage, equip, and execute. We first start off with the context of any individual church. I'm really big on just, again, going back to my medical background, we don't treat until we properly assess, and context matters. And so with any individual church, we're not looking to give them a one size fits all formula for how to do this. We start by understanding their context. How big is the church? What's the makeup of the church? Where is the church located in the city? Because different parts of the city have different needs. What are they already doing local missions wise that we can, expand on rather than give them something brand new to do? What are the languages that are spoken in their church? Lots of different context and assessment that we take to understand the context. And then we start to give them tools and resources. Um, from there, we co-design an execution strategy for that church that fits for them and is effective in their community. And so really what we hear from churches the most when they first step in is, we know this is a problem. We hear about it on the news. We hear about it in our community. We just have no idea what to do. There are churches all over our city who really want to know how to fix some of these things and to be a part of the solution. Many of them just don't have the handles or the tools to do it really well or to know where to step in. So we get to kind of come alongside rather than, we're not the organization that churches just give money to and we go fix the problem. We don't, theologically, we don't believe that that's how it's meant to work. But we can come alongside the church and help them be the vehicle for redemption in our city. And so that's kind of the overarching way that we help churches step in.
I love that. I love that. So you're basically like the heart that's beating through all the different churches and helping them go along. So I'm curious. So I mean, you mentioned helping them structure this plan for each individual one. It's not a one size fits all. So you've built the structure. You figured out what's going to be the right fit for this church. Are you then going to support them throughout the process? Is there a time where it's like, okay, we think you're ready to own this on your own? I mean, obviously, you only have so many people that can be working with your organization. So, I mean, how do you manage that time effectively?
Yeah, it really does. It does require a lot of relationship with people on our staff. It kind of depends on what that strategy is. So some churches come to us and they're like, we're already doing these things, but we'd really love to help on really mobilizing our people, getting a communication plan in place to where we can help engage our community to do this work. Or they may come and they have just nothing started and they're saying, we want to find a place. So it kind of varies between each individual church. But it does, we're kind of always here, and we may execute a strategy with the church where, for example, there's a group, if we identify there's a group home where foster youth live, that's 4 minutes from your church. And that's a place where they're like, yeah, we'll step in and we will mentor the kids. We will provide tutoring, or we'll, help with landscaping, or, just come around this organization and help the youth and the staff there. Then that may be part of their execution strategy. Or it may be that there's no parent night out for foster parents and kinship families in that part of the city. You have a great childcare
Got it.
space. Could you do this? And they say, that's a great idea. We're going to do that. How do we do it? Well, there's 3 or 4 other churches around the city who are doing just this. Let me show you how to replicate that. And then we kind of help them to launch it. And over time, they kind of just naturally start to take ownership of it. And then we're just still a phone call away. We're always kind of checking in with them. And then we'll have, ongoing kind of collaborative meetings where we'll always be giving information and resources. But the goal is that they would kind of take it and run with it. And they would see this as, we're taking ownership, not of everything. We're not single-handedly changing the trajectory of foster care in our city, but as one individual church, we have a particular place to serve, and we're going to do it well, knowing that it fits. It's part of the solution.
So cool. Yeah, I love that. And it's like, I just, the more that I see this, I mean, it's just so powerful how you can take this organization and impact so many different, areas, I mean, within Houston, and so many different lives, and like you said, fit to what the need is in that area. So I love the concept here. It's just a genius structure that you put together. With that being said, though, we have a lot of listeners who maybe aren't a part of a church, but they're really passionate about the foster care system. So if I'm an individual who doesn't have that community and isn't working within a church but wants to get involved, how would I do that? I mean, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to that assessment process again. We have people reach out quite a bit through our website, and they'll just say, I'm just interested in finding a place. I care about this issue, whether it's because they had a personal connection to it. If it's I grew up in foster care, or I had, some sort of a connection, or maybe they're just learning about it because they saw a news story or something. And we usually start with, setting up a phone call or a coffee or something and saying, what is it that you have to give? Are you an educator? Are you, what's your background? What can you do? What do you have to offer? Because there's usually a place along the river for someone. And it may not be in the river. It may not be, I want to be a foster parent. Like, I'm not going to be the one actively taking a kid. For some, it might be. If someone's interested in fostering, we have a prospective resource guide, foster parent resource guide that we give them to start helping them through just understanding that process. But we don't believe that everyone should do that. And so if it's, I'm an educator, well, let's give you tools for recognizing and knowing that there are probably kids in foster care in your classroom. Let's equip you to care for them really well in your context. There's a story that my friend Jason Johnson always tells, and it's a guy that owns a barbecue restaurant, and he knows I'm not going to be a foster parent. I cannot foster. It's not my gift. But, if there's a foster parent out there that's taking a new placement, or there's an event happening for foster families, I'm going to be there with the best barbecue. And I'm going to use what I have in this space to serve in this capacity. And so really it's just having that conversation and assessing, what do you have to give? And we can typically find a place for that maybe that's just providing tangible needs to a foster closet around the city. It can look like so many very different things.
Awesome, awesome. So we've been kind of brushing up on this topic, and so I figured might as now is a good time to talk about it. So the river, this concept of the river. I mean, if you go on your website, I know you have an awesome video that the viewers can look at. But could you just give like a quick 30-second overview of this concept of what the river is?
Yeah, I think the analogy actually came from the healthcare industry many years ago. It's been attributed to multiple people, so I really can't give a source for it. But there's this metaphor of, if you were to just imagine that you and two of your friends were walking along the side of a river, and you saw kids and families in the water kind of rushing down the rapids toward a waterfall. Of course, one of you would just start jumping in, trying to pull them to the side. But knowing that there's a waterfall downstream, one of you would run downstream to try and catch the ones that are getting past you. And eventually someone would say, why are these kids in the river in the first place? We've got to go upstream and put a stop to whatever's happening up there. And so there's this idea that you're running in different directions, but you're all attacking the same problem. There are kids and families in the water. We have to get them out. And so it presents this really vivid picture of, we all have a place along the river. And we always say too, it's not just this upstream to downstream river that we're talking about. In terms of the foster care system, all those issues that I said earlier are all interconnected. It's more like this raging, lazy river. If it's not disrupted somewhere, it just kind of feeds back into itself and becomes this kind of circular situation. And
Yeah,
so what we want to do is help Houstonians find their place along the river, give them tools, whether there are people in the system that are right up in the water or right on the side, or it's people that are further back who are just sending in reinforcements. There's still a place. It could go upstream. It could go all the way downstream. It could be in the river. It could be further back. There's no limit to what can be done along the river to start to disrupt this thing. And so it really has provided this beautiful picture that people can engage with and feel like they're a part of something. You mentioned before, I think we don't see ourselves as the answer to this problem. As one organization, we cannot solve this whole thing. The river is too much. There's too much brokenness all along that trajectory. But if we can equip others, we can actually multiply the impact that we see in our city. And so that's kind of the approach that we really take.
I love that, and I love how you mentioned, this lazy river concept, and just I feel like that paints a really good picture of, yes, it's a problem, and it's an exponential problem. Like, the longer that we let this continue on, the more and more it's going to grow. One becomes two, becomes four, becomes eight, and having those disruptions in the process is really, like you said, going to multiply the impact that you have. A small disruption in that river is going to impact so many lives for generations down the road. So I
Right.
love that you guys have started this, and it's something that I didn't realize I was passionate about until I really started, looking through your website and hearing more about, like, your story. So I hope the listeners also can understand, the impact that you guys are making. So before we go into, we're gonna do, how did you? We talked about, your process of becoming the founder of this, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But before we do, so this is a Houston-based organization. Is it currently only Houston? Are there any, correlations outside of Houston, Texas, or plans to grow beyond that?
No, not currently. We are in Houston for Houston.
Yeah,
People have asked about whether we would replicate outside of Houston, and I've always said unless we finish the job here, I don't really have plans to replicate. We're happy to kind of use principles that we operate with, but I also think that, as I mentioned before, context really, really matters. And what works in Houston, while there are principles that you can use outside that will translate, every city is different, and the context does matter. And so we may have a plan for what works here that wouldn't work in Austin or in Seattle or wherever. And so there are organizations who are doing really, really good work in those cities who have taken the charge to change things in their city in terms of foster care. And so I do know organizations all over the country that we don't partner officially, but we do get on calls together and say what's happening there, what's happening here, and we share a lot of resources and information so that we can just equip each other.
awesome. Well, great. So with that, I think it's clear the organization that you've started is operating with this real purpose, which is why you're on this episode. But I also want to hear about your story a little bit. I think what you did can be such a motivation for the listeners to kind of like take a step to go follow their passion. So I was curious. You talked about how it was kind of like this process of, you got involved in the foster care system starting from work, and then all of a sudden it grew to this. So I was curious, like, when you made the decision to start this organization, was it like this lightning bolt where you felt like, okay, it's time to do it right now? Or I mean, can you just walk me through kind of where your heart was throughout that time and how you finally made that decision to do this?
Yeah, it's an interesting story actually. So I had my daughter was about 1.5 when our first foster son, who is now our adopted son, came in. And then he was adopted at 17 months. And then the month after his adoption, I got pregnant with our third son, our third child, who is our now 6-year-old son. And during that time, we had closed our home since we had 3 little ones, or one on the way and 2 little ones. And so we had stepped away from foster care for the time and just said, we want to adopt again down the road, but here we are right now, kind of in the thick of it. And I actually went to a conference in Austin with an organization called Fostering Hope Austin. And I went there with another adoptive mom, really trying to understand how I could best serve our church in this space. How do we help mobilize just our one individual church? If I wanted to find out principles, and I knew that this organization works similar to what we do here. They're kind of a neutral organization, similar to ours, collaborative, helping to engage the church, helping to do trauma trainings and things like that. And so I went to this conference really looking for that. And I saw this organization that was working in this space that had this tremendous impact. And I didn't think I'd never seen it in Houston. And so I met with the executive director while I was there, and I just said, hey, does this exist in Houston? Because it really needs to. Like, the Lord was doing something in me while I was there. And I was just like, this is different. Houston needs this. But I've never heard of anything like this. And so met with her, and she said, no, I don't think that it does. And I'm like, pretty pregnant at this point, and I'm not looking for profit. And I was really hoping that she would say, yeah, there's this organization that you can just volunteer with. And it's, you've just been missing it. And she said, no, there's great work happening, but there's nothing kind of coordinated like this. So I went home and I told my husband, and probably just completely freaked him out. Because I said, I kind of went in looking for this, but I came back with this kind of bigger vision for where we could be going and what I could be doing. And it was really scary because I did not intend to start a nonprofit. It was not something I was looking for. Very much not on the radar. And I had zero knowledge of how to even do it. And so that started, I just had conversations with Julie over time and just started thinking through putting some things on paper. What would this even look like? And it wasn't until, I think about a year and a half later, that we really started looking at plans to start this thing. And it went through a couple of iterations before we actually launched. And then right in the middle, before we actually launched the organization, we got a call that the brother of my adopted son was actually going into foster care, and we were asked to take him. My son at that point that I was pregnant with, he was now 9 months old. And they're saying, can you take this 3-month-old? So I had a barely 4, barely 3, 9-month-old, and
Oh my goodness.
now a 3-month-old. And it just threw a wrench in everything. I was just, here I am thinking I'm going to start this nonprofit, and you're handing me an infant, another infant. I already have an infant. And so it kind of put a pause. And then, the 1-year plan that we had put in place became kind of a 3-year plan. And I was like, Lord, I don't know what this means. But it just became putting one foot in front of the other. And somehow the Lord still made it happen. And I can't explain it. It's just one of those things that just kind of happened. People are like, how did you do it? I'm like, I don't know. It just sort of happened. And that kind of has been the theme of our entire organization over the years. Now, almost 5 years in, it's the beautiful picture in the Gospels of feeding of the 5,000, where there's not enough. And the Lord, Jesus just says, all I'm asking you to do is bring your basket. And it has just a few fish and loaves, and it's just not enough, but it's exactly what's needed. And he just starts to multiply it. And I hope that's always our posture, because it's the only way this thing has happened, has just been like, this is what I have to give. And I know it's not enough in terms of time, resources, energy. There's just not enough to go around. And I think that's also the picture of the river. We always operate in the scarcity mindset of that there's just not enough. But I think theologically, when we just give that, it somehow multiplies. So yeah, that's kind of the picture. It's crazy. It never made any sense. I didn't know what I was doing. But it was really just one foot in front of the other and just kind of offering what was there.
I love that. There's a few things that I'm taking away from that story. The first is, like you said, being open and willing, having that willing heart and seeing like God was planting those seeds and kind of picking up those seeds as they came along and starting to plant them, but not really knowing where they're going to go. I just love that concept of like, it's not always like I have this vision and I'm going to go for it from the start. Like it's just you living your life and being open to where God was going to lead you. And that path took you to this point. So I really love that. The other point that I think just for the listeners here is you mentioned, there were the obstacles. You were like, I'm gonna start this, and then all of a sudden, here's another kid, and now you have 2 under 1 year old that you're taking care of, and as well as the other 2. So I just think it's an encouragement. Like the listener should be encouraged that, if you are thinking of starting something and maybe there's a hurdle or a bottleneck along the way that you need to get around, like that doesn't always need to be a stopping point. I think, like you said, you asked God, it was like, God, what should I do? I was supposed to start this. And it seems like he showed you that this was still the path regardless. And so, not getting hung up when things do inevitably come. And, whether it's starting your own organization or being really involved in another one or making a career move, et cetera, there's going to be bottlenecks and hurdles along the way. and just like making sure that you're in tandem with God and really hearing from Him is so awesome to just hear it firsthand. You know how that worked out in your life, and now, 5 years down the line, there's so many lives being changed in the Houston area. So I just think it's a really big encouragement to me and hopefully the listeners as well. So thank you for that story.
Of course. It's been a wild ride. And it's
and,
outside. I will say it's outside of what I think our culture says. I think we need to have a plan. You need to have, and yes, you do need to have a plan. Like you can't just kind of jump in not knowing. We talked about why it's important to assess what's in front of you, but there is this element of feeling the need to not be uncomfortable, and that's what keeps a lot of people from finding a place to engage. It's like I just want to act like none of these things exist. Like now you're telling me these things, and I have to know that they exist and that there is brokenness. But yeah, I think there's this element of like wanting our lives to be super comfortable and not liking the feeling of I don't have what it takes. I don't have what it takes to do something like this, but being able to live in that and accept it and kind of just step forward and see, what happens.
yeah, yeah. No, and I feel like that's the picture of it always brings me back to like Paul, how he says, we're boasting in our weakness. We're not doing this in our own strength. And I'm sure you can attest to that, that like you said, you you knew what you were getting into, but probably not the whole scope of everything that was going to be uncovered. And I'm sure maybe looking back on it, if you were in that space and knew everything that was going to come, that probably would have been frightening and could have halted you there from ever starting. But that seed was planted, you started, and now you hit those areas where you feel like you can't do it in your own strength, and you know that you never were meant to in the first place. And so
Absolutely.
I love that picture there. So awesome. Well, that was a great story. I love hearing about the people behind the organizations as well, because there's so much to be told there. So with that being said, we'll jump into the next section, one of our last ones. So this is the topic of the day, and you mentioned there's some changes going on that you all are pretty focused on in the foster care space today. So could you maybe tell the listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm going to try to get not too technical on it because anything in some of these spaces can get really complex. But um, ultimately, what's happening, at least in Texas, there was a decision made within the legislature a couple of years ago to kind of redesign the way that foster care is done here in Texas. And the short of it is that we're essentially privatizing an already somewhat privatized system. If you look at kind of what Florida has done with their child welfare system, it's kind of similar to that. Essentially, you have kind of CPS or DFPS, those words are kind of used interchangeably, and they're kind of the authority over the child welfare system. And they, place kids in foster homes, but they use what we already have is a privatized system where we have places like DePelchin or Arrow or, all of these. There's 30 different, probably more than that now, probably 50 placing agencies where they license foster homes. And then CPS will place them in those homes. So what they're doing is kind of privatizing that system even further, where they're kind of taking some of that authority locally in each local community, kind of outside of CPS, and putting a private agency in charge at the local level. And it doesn't sound like a huge shift, but it does change. The hope with this new kind of system is that each region, or kind of we are Houston and the surrounding counties is our region when it comes to child welfare, and each region would actually take ownership of our own region. And we would try to keep kids in our own region instead of sending them to other parts of the state and things like that. And the hope is that every region would actually build up their own capacity, so that kids would stay together with their families or with their siblings. And so it's essentially, like I said, privatizing that system. And people always ask me, is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What's your thought? And as with most things, it's probably going to be a little bit of both. It's going to be complex. It's a big major shift. But the biggest thing, I think the biggest takeaway from it is that it allows for a lot of creative innovation in the system. So now, instead of kind of having this kind of bureaucratic system that's really stationed in Austin, but making decisions for the whole state, each region gets to kind of figure out what works for here. And it's going to be complex and there's going to be lots of challenges. But I do think that there's this big opportunity to innovate in this space. And so we've been working with some of the stakeholders in our region, trying to figure out what is this going to look like. But the biggest thing I think that's relevant here is that it the success of this type of model hinges on an ability of a community to collaborate and work together. And so we've always kind of, you to hear about CPS in the news and all of that, they'll still be a part of the conversation. But there is this idea that it opens the door for people along the river to have even more of an impact. You can be a part of the solution for Houston. And so I think that that's really exciting. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be a big shift. But there is a lot of opportunity for people to step in and it really make an impact. So I'm happy to kind of share links and things like that if people are interested in learning more about that shift. But it'll be an interesting thing to watch over time.
Awesome. Yeah. So it sounds like anyone listening here who feels, passionate about this, like you said, this is the time to get involved.
Yeah.
And so is this already in place, or is this a process that's like going on and it's going to be changed over time? What does that look like?
So they're rolling out different regions, one at a time or a couple at a time. And so part of the state is already moving forward with this. So a lot of the different cities, regions, I've already like identified who that contractor, that single, they call it a single source continuum contractor. They've identified who that is and they're already rolling it out. The legislative session that just passed actually funded for Houston to be one of the next ones. And so actually in September, they'll be putting out their request for applications for that contractor. So it will be coming very soon. So there's a lot more conversations happening now. And it's not something that, every listener needs to just go and research all of these things. They can if they want, but it's knowing about it and knowing what's happening. If people are part of a church and things like that, I think it's helpful to know what's going on in the space and then how they can step in and be a part of kind of the solution for our city.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think you had a great idea. We'll add in those links to the show notes here. So anyone interested in finding more about this, then they can there. So awesome. Well, this has been great. The last thing that we do as part of this show is I'm going to put you on the spot here, and we're seeking to live purposeful lives, and so I will always ask the person that I'm speaking with, if you had one thing, it can be a sentence, it could be a short summary of what do you think someone should do if they really want to live a purposeful life? Like, what would be your advice if someone, is thinking, I feel like my life isn't purposeful today, but I want to get there, what advice would you have for them?
Yeah. I was thinking about this yesterday, not this specific question because you just sprung it on me, but I was thinking about remembering that, theologically, I believe that even in the fall, the Lord never lost authority over the world, but we did. Someone once said that to me. In Christ, and going to get churchy here, he gave that authority back to us, and he's redeeming the world through that. And so, as the kind of global church, if you're part of the church, I'll kind of speak to that aspect first. We have the authority to step in and to be a part of what God is doing and redeeming and restoring our culture, in our world. And I think that's an incredible thing that's not wasted with anyone. And so there is something within each one of us that has been cultivated, not just for our good, just in ourselves, but for what's happening in the world. And I think if you look really closely, it's easy, especially in our day and time right now, to look at all the things that are so broken out there. But I also think if you look closely enough, we see these moments and these glimpses of redemption that's happening and restoration that's happening. And it's not just happening out there, it's happening through us. And so I take that idea very it's very humbling to me to think that there's anything that could be used in that. It's a very humbling thought that that the Lord would choose to redeem creation and restore creation through broken people, who are people that don't have enough, you know. Um, but I think it would start there. Like I think that's where purpose, when we talk about just the purpose of our lives, it's somewhere in that space. Whether that's I'm a teacher and I have this classroom of kids and I leave every day feeling like, what did I even accomplish? There's so many needs and there's so many things I have to teach these kids, or if I can't think of all, like just all of the different scenarios out there. If you're even as a foster parent or just a parent, you've got all these kids with all these needs. There's so many things out there, even oil and gas, whatever your job is, there's something redemptive there. It's just having the eyes to see what it is that you're stepping into that is worth restoring, and redeeming. And so I think it starts there. I don't have any huge pearls of wisdom in that, but I think if you look deeper, there's always something there, that the Lord is using.
I love that. Yeah, I think, I mean, you said it much better than I will as I summarize, but, you know, I think that story about, finding purpose where you are is really what I'm hearing through that. Whatever you're doing today, it doesn't mean like you need to totally 180 and become someone new. Like you can have purpose in what you're doing. I love this story about, or this picture of, there's like this pie of our life, and we have family, we have work, we have, our activities, etc. And like we have church, and there's always like, we have the slice that we say is church, and some people, most people, it's like, okay, I have church, and then all the other slices, that's where it is. Like, you know, if you have God, not just in church, but in all the other spots of your life, where is that fit in? You're going to have purpose in all those areas as well. So I think, you said it much more elegantly than I just did, but I love that story. And if you don't mind, could you repeat what you said at the beginning? You said, you know, God didn't lose control, was it during the fall we did? Or what was the
Something that somebody told me once was, in the fall, the God never lost authority over the world,
authority?
but we
Yep.
did. And it was bought back for us and then kind of handed to us, um, to have that authority in the world today and as his church. And so it was really comforting to me to know, like, we always talk about the fall and how it just kind of all, went to crap. uh, but he never lost full control over the world, but we lost our authority. Um, and we lived in that until it was kind of kind of purchased back for us.
Yeah.
And I think we don't always think about the gospel narrative in that way. We just kind of think about, well, now we have this way to heaven. Well, no, yes, but also we have the gift of eternal life, right, and salvation. But we also have the gift of having the authority given to us, and that means that we have power in the world in some capacity, to do something with. And I wanted to add too, as you were talking, I think it's interesting or important to note that I don't think that there's purpose just in the good things, that we have. I think that I've been really thinking a lot about just suffering and the fact that there can also be purpose in that. We think about purpose in our job. We think about purpose in what we've been given and stewarding that. But, if there's people out there that are just like, yeah, I'm in the midst of suffering, and how could that even be used? Like, I can't even talk about whether I can have purpose in my job or this, but I'm in this deep suffering, and it's hard to figure out what he does with that. But all I can say is I don't think it's meaningless. I don't think that suffering is meaningless. We don't really understand why we suffer, but I do think that there's still purpose in it, as hard as that is. If that
Yeah. Yeah.
adds
No.
anything to
I love it. Thank you so much, Amber. There's so much in this, and I would just say, anyone listening here, go back and re-listen to this section, because there's so much, to take away, and just remind ourselves of, as we're like you said, if you're feeling down, if you're in a place, a low season, there could be purpose in that as well, and
Yeah.
not to get discouraged because you hit that hard spot in your life. So awesome. Thank you so much for the time. One thing that I want to do to close is people are probably going to be interested in getting involved or giving back. So first thing is, we do a donation match for the first $1,000 that gets given from the listeners that heard about it through this podcast. So, you and I had spoken, and I think you said go to riversideproject.org/give. And if you go in there, you can put a little comment that says RP or real purpose. And that way we know, you heard about it on this podcast, and we'll make sure that match goes through. In addition to that, you had alluded to something on the website. If you're an individual or a church that wants to get involved, could you maybe just give a quick overview of how that works as well?
Yeah, sure. If you go to just riversideproject.org, you can just scroll down. There's a connect with us kind of form that will just tell us what your interest is. And if you just fill that out, let us know who you are, and someone from our team will reach out and just learn a little bit more about how you could engage.
Awesome. Well, Amber, it was a pleasure hearing more about this amazing organization that you started. Thank you so much for being such an encouragement to the listeners as well as myself. Just for everyone out there that's listening, just remember, whether it's getting involved in, the Riverside Project or starting your own thing, just remember, go out there and live with that real purpose, and remember that, like Amber said, there's going to be tough times, there's going to be good times, but there can be purpose in all of them. So
Absolutely.
awesome.
Thanks so much for having me, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Amber.